Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, Olympic controversy. Fear of a terrorist attack and controversy over Russia's strict new anti-LGBTQ policies dominated the news as the 2014 Winter Olympics opened this week. Russia's laws banning, quote, propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations, end quote, meaning promotion of gay rights and any public displays of affection among same-sex couples, could result in prison terms. Olympic athletes were mulling how to protest these policies publicly without incurring fines, deportation, and jail terms of up to 15 days. Amnesty International staged a benefit concert in New York, where two members of the group Pussy Riot appeared to raise money to fight those laws. And late this week, AT&T, a sponsor of the U.S. Olympic Committee, became the first major American corporation to publicly condemn Russia's law. So, Hillary Rosen, is the U.S. government doing enough to show support for LGBTQ people in Russia?
Well, you know, I think they are. Half the delegation that we have sent to these Olympics are gay. That's not making President Putin very happy.
To me, it's not that they're not doing enough about LGBT rights. They're not doing enough generally to condemn Russia's human rights crisis all across the board ahead of these Olympics.
I agree with Francesca. I think that the U.S. government can do more to highlight this issue and this huge discrimination case. But I also wanted to point out the Canadian Institute of Discrimination today has put out an ad that everybody's talking about, which was the Olympics have always been a little gay. Let's fight to keep them that way, quote unquote.
Right. This isn't just an issue of gay rights, but at this point it's an issue of free speech and being able to express political dissidence. I frequently see myself as a political dissident in the U.S., so I support the right of Russian people to express dissidence with their own government.
So everybody here agrees that the government should be doing more.
Well, it's not just the government, it's the Olympic Committee. You know, the fact that they even selected Russia to have the Olympics this year blows my mind. Russia is not generally considered a free country by Freedom House, which is paid by the government to determine which countries are generally seen as free. And so I don't know why they would have chosen in 2008 Beijing, and then back to back now they choose Russia, when there are multiple free countries that have never had the Olympics before.
I think that's right, and I think that the U.S. Olympic Committee is probably going to that the International Olympic Committee is not going to make this mistake again, because this issue has kind of hijacked the Olympics in a way. And that is a really important point here, which is, particularly as an LGBT activist, we don't want to be in the position where Americans who are out there wanting to support their athletes, wanting this to be about the games. These kids have worked their entire lives to get to this point. We don't really want to hijack their moment with politics in a way that's unfair to them.
Exactly.
So we have to make the point, and you have to do the protest, but you really all want to keep the sport. And so I worry sometimes about the risk of going overboard in a way that's a backlash. I think that to date it's been pretty respectful. We've talked about the Canadian situation. There's something called Principle 6, which is a quiet protest about the Olympic Charter having a principle that is non-discrimination. I think that matters, but I think we have to be careful.
I think the United States is right to be participating, though. I'm happy to see our athletes there, and I'm happy to see the United States really being a leader. Other countries look to us, and they look to our Constitution, to our culture, to our politics, and they see us, I believe, as an example. So we should be setting that example of how to treat other people, of how to have free speech, and how to have the ability to speak your mind about very.
Do you think Putin, these laws were just passed last June, do you think he put them through, and, you know, it's a puppet parliament, he put them through just because of the Olympics and just to stick a finger in the eye of, you know, the rest of Europe and the United States anyway?
Maybe, but I don't think Putin really cares. And I think the discourse being generated by, you know, holding the Olympics there and shining a light on the discrimination and the legislation that is discriminating against LGBTQ people. But I don't think it's going to bring about any real changes. I almost think it's, like you were saying, the games are being politicized. And, you know, Obama didn't go, Cameron didn't go. A lot of heads of states purposely boycotted the opening ceremony, and the UN Secretary Secretary General, you know, took that opportunity to kind of speak out against what's happening in Russia, but at the end of the day, doesn't really make a difference.
Well, what would make a difference?
I think
what could we do that would make a difference?
This international focus is making a difference in several important ways, which is it is putting some warnings there that when you go in an international forum, you're on notice. It's also brought to light the fact that there are these human rights abuses all over the world, and it's because leaders like Putin, and he did it for the Olympics. I think he did it to sustain a radical base of, you know, that's keeping him in power in Russia, and he's satisfying a radical base just like leaders are around the world. But this kind of attention puts some pressure on them over the long term, I think.
But I think the Olympic Committee does need to send a clear message that countries that engage in human rights abuses and free speech violations will not be allowed to have the Olympics in the future. And I do not think they have done a good job in the last, 6 to 8 years of making that clear.
I totally agree, and it's such a huge principle that the committee is based on. How can they be dismissive of it in any way?
And that's where the corporations come into play, because the corporate sponsors are what funds the Olympic Committee's
But then look at
effort to
AT&T.
do
AT&T stepped out against them.
Yes.
AT&T.
Although they're not actually paying for the games. It's great that they did it. But, there are several companies, Coca-Cola, McDonald's,
yes,
that have really not done nearly enough. They're trying to keep their politics at home and play. But those companies fund essentially the operations of the Olympics. And the pressure on those companies is really important.
And there really is the Olympic Committee is a self-governing body, and who gets appointed and, what they do and how much they make is all.
It's a club.
It's a really small club, and it's a club that's annoying a lot of people.
Yeah.
But do you think the way we have made women's rights in terms of USAID contracts, making sure that a certain percentage at least go to women-owned initiatives and companies, should LGBTQ be on that level as well?
There actually is a program now at USAID that the Obama administration started to do just that, to do organizing the same way they did that for women, to support gay and lesbian organizations around the world in their human rights work. And they're getting some good results, so we'll see. Continues. None of this would happen under a Bush administration, let's just say. We're not going to have half the delegation be gay. We're not going to give money to, support organizations. President Obama might be getting some grief for not doing enough, but he's done a lot.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or @To the Contrary. From gay rights to Vatican abuses. Pope Francis must remove the clergy responsible for slave-like conditions at the Catholic Church's notorious Magdalen laundries in Ireland, according to a new UN report. The UN is also calling for a full investigation into decades of abuse of girls and young women in Catholic-run workhouses. The scandal is the subject of the Oscar-nominated film Philomena. The UN charges the women, mainly single mothers, had their children taken away and were placed in institutions. The women did not receive adequate food or medicine and were frequently subjected to physical and sexual abuse by priests and nuns. The Vatican is accused of allowing these practices to continue. The UN demands an apology and paid compensation for the victims. The Holy See said it's committed to protecting the rights of children. So among the demands is abortion rights for women, stronger abortion rights for women. Is there any way the Vatican would ever go for that?
Well, Bonnie, I don't think that that's necessarily like what's the issue here with this. I think the fact is that they didn't look into this for so long, for so many years. It's been nearly 20 years since we first heard about these violations, and they still haven't done an investigation. And I think that that's why this issue is still alive.
And what's Pope Francis going to do about it?
I'm very, very hopeful that hopefully Pope Francis will address this issue. He's done a really good job so far of addressing the child sex abuse claims and scandals throughout the church.
Has he?
Well, at least he's been addressing it. He's been admitting it. At least he's been,
yeah, but he hasn't been opening up records. I mean, even...
That's true, but compared to his predecessors who didn't even want to acknowledge it or even admit that this was a problem, I think he's taking baby steps, hopefully, in the right direction. What I'm worried about is that the church's stance combined on this issue, combined with their abortion stance, is repetitive about the fact that they just do not value women's lives or women's rights. I mean, this is a systematic and much larger issue that they need to deal with.
Hadley.
This is just tragic. I mean, it's a tragic story. My heart goes out to women who've been abused within the church, outside of the church, all around the world. Sex trafficking. This is a major issue that needs addressing from both sides of the political aisle. And I think that conversations like these are so important because it is important to address. This is a very personal, deep issue for the women who've experienced this, and it's a tragic story.
I saw a movie about 10 years ago, and I didn't look up the name. I should have, bad me. But maybe you guys know it, or maybe some of the viewers will write in and tell me. It was a similar situation to Philomena. It was about a woman, a young girl, who got raped by her cousin at a wedding and got pregnant and was sent to one of these laundries. And, you know, how they get no money, they get no anything. I think in the end she managed to escape somehow, but, you know, the records, they want to know what happened to the babies. The babies are taken away from them. How can the church do that? You know, and not, in this day and age, release the records so they can at least find out where their kids went.
And also, it's a very, very recent history. I mean, the last laundry closed in 1996, and I think it's great that they want to open up the records to reunite the mothers with their children, but I also think it's reflective of the fact that the church has, society to an extent, have always punished women for being sexually active. I mean, where are the men that got the women pregnant? They're not in these laundries. We don't even know where they went. It's like women are being punished for being unwed single mothers, like it was a choice that they wanted to take.
Yeah, it's such an unfortunate classic institutional abuse of power, because when people were needy in these communities, where did they go? They went to the church, because that's what the church tells families to do. Come to us when you're needy. So when they're in their time of need, the most vulnerable, with their daughters and family pregnant, that's what the church does with it and takes advantage of it. What I worry about, and I'll say it, is that Pope Francis has said remarkable things over the last year. What I worry about is that the bureaucracy of the Catholic Church is still so entrenched that the rhetoric will fly above the ears, but the bureaucracy won't change. For him to have a lasting impact on the church the way he says he wants to, he has to get down into these details and change things.
But you know, aside from the bureaucracy, I mean, he has said wonderful things, and I'm starting to wonder, is it talk or will there be any action? He did set up a code within the church, you know, judicial system about, you know, crimes for abusing children and such, but you know, we haven't seen action on this or the priest pedophilia scandal.
Right, and I want to make the very important point that there are scores of homes. For every one example of sex abuse, there are Christian ministries, there are Christian homes that will take in single mothers with open arms, that will provide the help, financial and otherwise, that these women need. Anybody who's in a vulnerable situation, most Christian homes and ministries will open their arms to you and provide services and not abuse. So
when you say Christian, are you talking Christian versus Catholic?
Catholic is, I consider Catholicism a type of Christianity, and I've been to homes that Mother Teresa started in Calcutta, India, that take care of dying people, that take care of people who really have no other hope. So there's an amazing ministry there within the Catholic Church.
I don't think anybody is debating the great history that the church has of doing good work.
The church is letting the bad stories take over the good stories. That's the church's fault.
And they can
not
respond.
our fault or
they should respond.
But it's also the church's fault for letting policies exist and persist continuously. It's still to this day that allows these things to happen.
I think we're putting a little bit too much of the blame on the church here, because we haven't even talked about the government and how the government was involved. You want to talk about abuse of power? In Ireland, the government funded these places. They knew what was going on. They sent women there. And that is what the biggest injustice in all of this was, is the government in Ireland's role and other countries in this problem.
Well, usually the church and the government, sadly, are in bed together.
Yeah, it is very sad. Behind the headlines, working discrimination and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. For the first time in history, a commission made up of 5 women.
All the commissioners are women. Contrast that to when the EOC began, and it was responsible for enforcing the sex discrimination law, part of Title VII. it ruled that having separate advertisements for men and women, right, help wanted ads, men, women, that was not sex discrimination. The commission ruled. Because men and women wanted different types of jobs. So it was fine to have different advertisements.
But today, things are different. Kai Feldblum is the first openly gay commissioner. She's helping lead the agency through a transformation to be more strategic and targeted about investigating and suing employers for discrimination.
There are at least 4 significant issues that the EEOC has to focus on: pay equity, pregnancy discrimination, sexual harassment, and gender stereotyping.
The EEOC recently settled a pregnancy discrimination suit with J.C. Penney, in which a woman was denied employment after disclosing she was pregnant.
We've got an old problem and a new problem. The old problem, which is astonishing that it is still as prevalent as it is that women are fired when they get pregnant. There's also a new issue. Individuals who get injured on the job are often given light duty by companies. It is at least plausible that under the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, an employer also has to give such light duty to pregnant women who have lifting restrictions.
Feldblum says the EEOC has made this issue part of its strategic enforcement plan. It may also be up for review by the Supreme Court. This type of discrimination mainly affects low-income women.
Employers are thinking about constraining labor costs. So for them to get rid of a woman who suddenly now has a lifting restriction and just take another woman who doesn't, that's what seems for them to be in their basic bottom line economic interest. So unless there's a law that says to them, no, you cannot do that, you need to accommodate, I mean, people just act on their, what looks like their economic interest, even though the words of the statute say you must treat a pregnant woman the same as you would treat someone else in their ability or inability to work. No court has said that the Pregnancy Discrimination Act requires it.
The EEOC will maintain a broad focus to root out discrimination. One area Feldblum hopes to make progress in: LGBT rights.
Transgender people early on brought charges to the EEOC and then cases saying, discriminated against because you were fine when I was a man, but now that I've transitioned to be a woman, you don't like me. That's sex discrimination. And if you're fine with me and I'm telling, as your employee, because you think I am dating a guy, and then you find out that actually I'm dating a woman, and suddenly it's not okay, you arrest me, you fire me, how is that not because of sex?
Ultimately, Feldblum believes it is up to courts and other societal structures to, as she put it, transition into the 21st century. And millennial women may be the generation that is poised to drive society forward.
I do believe that the millennial women are probably more aggressive because they haven't, thank God, been brought up with some of the social baggage that the women in the 50s and the 60s and 70s.
So are you as a millennial, do you have less baggage on these issues? Do you think having more women on the EEOC will help women ultimately?
I do believe that younger women, just by virtue of changes culturally in the United States, have witnessed less sex discrimination and therefore have a smaller view of its impact in our economy. But I'm glad we're talking about this story because it illustrates, one, that sex discrimination is real and persistent, and that we have laws to address it. So I'm happy that we do have laws that address sex discrimination. Actually, the number of claims for sex discrimination went down from 2012 to 2013.
Why did you laugh when she was saying that?
Oh, I started laughing because Hadley was basically making the point that we already have laws, so therefore we don't need any additional laws to protect us from this, and so that's why I started laughing.
But the committee is to make sure that the laws are enforced.
Enforcement, right.
And I think that's important, and I hope that having 5 women on this committee is going to make them a little bit more sensitive and also aware discriminations that women have to face, day in and day out in their workforce. I always like to say, sadly, the reality is that a woman candidate is not always a woman's candidate, but maybe these 5 women will prove everyone wrong, because this is an issue that really needs to be moderated.
You know, this is why elections matter, because the majority appointees here were appointed by President Obama, and the laws have been on the books for years, but they weren't enforced in previous Republican administrations. And Kai Feldblum, a brilliant lawyer, and her colleagues are making sure that the laws that are on the books are actually reaching people that they need to, because it's not just the cases that are brought. Obviously, the EEOC's main function is to send signals to all employers by making examples of some of the worst ones, and it's critical that they do that and go as far as they can, because honestly, in past administrations, the Republicans would send just as strong a signal by not enforcing laws, by letting people get away with things, whether it was here or whether it was at the Justice Department or the EPA, for that matter.
But how do you always enforce these? And that's part of the other reason why I was laughing, too. But how do you always enforce these? Just because someone claims, I wasn't hired because I was a woman, that must be the reason. Or it was because I was pregnant, that must be the reason. How do you actually prove that?
Or you were fired.
Or I was fired for those reasons. Maybe it was because you were incompetent. That's an idea. Maybe it was because there are other people who were more qualified.
But there's actually, there's proceedings. You have to prove it.
You have to prove it.
You can't just claim it.
And there are often witnesses, and there are often rationales, and there are often piles of evidence, and that's what judges are for. But if you don't bring the cases, if you don't build the cases, if you don't give people the chance to feel like
and if you don't have enough proof, your case will be dismissed.
Right. So, but if the common feeling is not as advanced as the litigation is, does the litigation help change society's views on these issues so the discrimination will stop?
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes you have landmark cases, or the fact that you even bother to file a case, you know, gives a signal to other people that you're an example of, yes, maybe I should, or, you know, there's something that I could do to change my circumstances.
Right, and I'd much rather the current administration focus on enforcing the laws that we have about equal employment opportunities rather than encourage writing more laws that have to do with restrictions on women's pay or regulations of men and women's pay that actually might serve to take away our flexibility in the work.
There are still some holes in this, in the current law.
Like what?
Well, for instance, you can still be fired in 30 states in this country just for being gay or lesbian. And if you can bring that case to court, you can't even bring that case to court because there is no National Employment Non-Discrimination Act. There's only one in some states. So that's why the point Kai was making, that for transgender rights, you can have a sex discrimination case, but you can't have a gay discrimination case. So, you know, that's an important thing. So laws have to keep up, and they have to be enforced.
Okay, so for straight women and pregnant women, there are the laws, but the holes are just applied to LGBTQ.
Gender, race, religion.
Right, many people don't realize that sex is a protected class, but sexual orientation is not.
Right.
So how likely do you think it is that this Congress will do anything to change that? And
well, the Senate passed the bill. It's up to John Boehner as to whether the House will pass it as well.
Well, right, and ENDA is one kind of law, and the Paycheck Fairness Act is another kind of law. So, you know, we have to consider each piece of legislation based on its merits and based on the needs for it. And concerning women's pay, as you said, the Civil Rights Act already protects women from sex discrimination on the basis of pay.
What about not protecting the EEOC, I'm sorry, the 30 states not protecting LGBTQ rights?
You know, I think we could go back and forth on the protecting of the LGBT rights, and part of the problem here, and I know I'm going to have like the most unpopular opinion of the day, is that in some cases, you know, if you're at a certain sort of an organization, maybe it would be unprofessional and inappropriate to have someone out there cross-dressing. And in some places, you know, maybe you wouldn't want to hire someone who's 6 months pregnant because they are 6 months pregnant, because it's a project or a job at which you can't have them gone for 3 months in the middle of the project. And so I'm sorry if that's an unpopular opinion today, but I do think that there are some cases in which it benefits the employer not to hire those people.
Quick response.
Discrimination can never be justified like that. Maybe as an employee, I'll be like, I shouldn't take on this job because I am pregnant. But if you're going to fire me for being 6 months pregnant, that's when the
not fire, not hire, not fire, not hire.
But isn't that kind of okay? I didn't get hired for the job because I'm pregnant, but you're going to fire me for, you know? I mean, it's murky waters there. So.
All right. That's it for this edition. We'll solve it next time. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for